And time now for the PIX panel. Joining me this week, Henry Rosoff and Jay Dow, who have together really reported extensively on the issue of the migrant crisis. Jay, great to have you here for the first time.
Good to be here.
So let's talk first and foremost about the mayor. A lot of ground covered here. Henry, let me begin with you, right? Two big points that the mayor made.
Yeah, he made news on two fronts. He articulated something that was pretty close to former President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy as far as what he would like to see as a national solution to sort of the flow of migrants that we've seen here. Republicans have been calling on the president to do that for quite some time. And when you said if you're worried your words are going to be used politically, he said, I don't care. I've got one job and New York is hurting right now. My city's hurting right now. We have to do what's necessary. The other point is he mentioned we're approaching a time where we may have to see families, women and children in congregate settings, which is something the city has tried to avoid tooth and nail, only sending single adult, predominantly men to those settings.
Not only that, he talked about tents. And I don't know if the reference was the tents like we're seeing set up or tent cities like you see like in Los Angeles, Jay. But you're out there on the streets, you see what's going on. What are you hearing from the migrants in terms of them coming here to New York City? What are they coming here for?
Well, they're coming here for opportunity, and word is spreading so quickly about what New York City has to offer. You know, this right to shelter policy for decades was something that was just known internally here in New York City, but now it's spreading. So when you get down to the border, people are chatting near the centers. As people get on the buses, there's opportunity in New York City, and they cannot put you out on the street. And you mentioned the solutions that we're seeing locally. There are no more pretty solutions.
Right.
You're right. There are going to be tents. And historically, they have put families in hotels, in settings where they would not be subjected to the kind of conditions that have been notoriously described, like the shelter on the east side, the men's shelter, where people are talking about a lack of safety, crowding, sleeping on top of one another. It's getting to the point where every neighborhood is going to be touched, and I've been at so many of these neighborhood meetings where you see people outraged that this issue is now creeping into their own backyard.
A quick anecdote when you talk about word spreading. I interviewed an asylum seeker he has applied for asylum. He has a legal work permit. He's doing DoorDash now.
That's a great story, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a success story. He's out of shelter. He's on his own. He has working papers. But he didn't come to New York. He got bused by Governor Abbott to D.C. He got himself to New York because, as Jay so well articulated, word is spreading.
Well, not only that, I mean, if you look at what Deputy Mayor Isom said, right, that Philadelphia and Chicago are saying after 30 days, that third day 31, hey, go to New York, because there's no time limit, there's no expiration date. The issue is the work authorizations, right? And so you were listening to the interview with the mayor in terms of what he had to say about the federal government and Governor Hochul. It seems that he is not mincing words when it comes to the federal government, but he's still saying he has a good relationship with the governor, Henry.
He really doesn't have a choice because the governor is the one who's driving a lot of the funding that's helping keep the city afloat. He mentioned the numbers explicitly. We got $1 billion last year. We're going to get $1 billion this year. He has to work with her across a whole number of things, including the marijuana issue that you just mentioned. He said he could clean that up in 3 months if he got some state authority. Well, you don't get state authority unless you play nice with the governor. So he really has to work with her on so many fronts that even if the legal filings on this right to shelter lawsuit have been getting nastier and nastier, he doesn't really have a choice but in the spoken word to keep things on the up and up because the city needs that relationship to function. Yeah,
and look, there's the work authorization issue too. He talked about how some are getting properly. You did the story on one. Others are working illegally, which was no surprise. You're seeing it even play out on the streets, right? Gail Brewer was here last week talking about how she's seeing more and more people selling fruit on the streets, and that while that's illegal, it's happening. Then there's the other issue of schools, which was the first day back to school, Jay. And I know you were covering the back to school day for the migrant children as well. How did it go?
Well, there was no way that this was going to be smooth across the board, not when you're trying to incorporate 20,000, and that's a conservative number, migrant children, asylum seeker children who are now all of a sudden thrust into the school system. So there was always a jockeying for position among ordinary, longtime New Yorkers trying to make sure that their children get into the school that they want them into, preferably their home zone. So now when you have these shelters, family shelters, there's one in East Harlem on the border between the Upper East Side and East Harlem where we were a few days ago. Now all of a sudden you have dozens and dozens of new families who want to make sure that their children are going to the school right up the block, and they're competing for a spot in those schools with people who have lived in the neighborhood for years. There were some hiccups. That was to be expected. City officials warned that would be the case for several days leading up to the first day of school.
Right, but the mayor said it went pretty smooth. So what's a hiccup?
Well, the hiccup is that you had a lot of people who were told they needed to come back
Right, okay.
the next day for an appointment because they couldn't be placed, their child couldn't be placed on day one.
Right.
The big hiccup that we're going to see potentially, we don't know yet because we don't have a crystal ball, is whether or not there are going to be enough ENL, and ENL is the new term for ESL,
Yes.
English as a new language,
Right.
teachers. They've been touting the number of teachers that they're bringing on board. There's a recruiting pipeline, but you have to wonder, is 1,000 teachers even enough to
yeah.
handle 20,000 new students?
They're changing
Most
up
of
tenure
them-
rules to
Right.
help with this.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and most of them predominantly speak Spanish.
Explain the tenure rule.
Well, essentially, teachers who were doing other things will not lose their tenure track and tenure preferences when they go to do English as a new language, ENL, right? Yeah.
And that held up a lot of teachers from actually going that route because they didn't want to lose their tenure.
Yeah.
Now they can.
Wow, that's very interesting. So much ground to cover. Great to have both of you because you're on the streets doing this each and every day. But thank you both for being here, Jay and Henry. Appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
All right, everybody.